Okay, so our goal today is to talk about what I've titled the lesson is Anatomy of Cells. And before we begin going further in depth into this lesson, I want to talk about, at its core, what biology is going to do over the next couple of units, and especially in Bio 20. We like to talk at first about the basic living structure of life, the smallest thing we can have that's alive, a cell. But what happens when you take a bunch of cells and put those together? Well, if they work together as a team of cells, all doing the same thing, we call that a tissue. And you probably have heard the word tissue before. There's brain tissue, there's heart tissue, right? There's muscle tissue, right? Does one muscle cell have the ability to do a whole lot? No. But put a bunch of muscle cells together, and now you have, a muscle tissue, right? Now, when you put a bunch of tissues together, you put enough tissues together working in sequence, you then make an organ. As an example, there are many different types of heart tissues inside of the heart. The heart has 4 different ventricles that use to pump blood in different directions, right? So there are many different mini muscles inside of the heart, but put all of that heart tissue together collectively, and you now have what's called an organ. Finally, take multiple organs, put them together, and you now have what's known as an organ system. Okay? And you're probably familiar with some of this vocabulary already. As an example, let's talk about the circulatory system. You ever heard that phrase before, circulatory system? What's an organ in the circulatory system? The heart. That's probably the most common one, right? What else do we need in a circulatory system? Veins, arteries. There's one more big one. What's the whole point of pumping blood around your body? You need your lungs, yeah, because we need the oxygen to go in there, right? Those are all parts of the circulatory system. Okay. Well, in the same way that what I've just discussed here is the field of anatomy, describing all of the organs, all of the tissues, all of the systems in the human body, a cell is kind of like that as well. A cell has all of these things inside of it, and we call them organelles. You can see that, the bolded word on the top of my slide here. The name organelle literally means little organ. Okay? It's like the mini organs that are within a cell, and they all have a very similar function. In the same way that we have a brain whose job it is to organize and keep track of what's going on in your body, well, the cell has a mini brain. It has a nucleus. And in the same way that your body has the organ of your skin, cells have a similar sort of organ. They call it an organelle. It's the cell membrane, things that let things in or out of your body. Your skin is a protective barrier that lets sweat out, but it prevents diseases and germs from entering. Okay? So that's where we're going to begin this topic today, is we're going to talk about all of the micro organs or organelles that we have in the human cell that are very similar to the human body. Yes? Perfect. Okay, so let's get on to the next ones down here. Okay? What we've got then are 2 categories of cells. Okay? The 2 categories of cells are eukaryotes and prokaryotes. Okay? The eukaryotes, basically, they're things that have a nucleus. They have a brain. They have something at its core that's in charge. Prokaryotes, I'm going to move this out of the way so you can see all of it. Prokaryotes are things that don't have a membrane-bound nucleus. They don't actually have a nucleus. The best example I can give of this right here is a virus. Okay. You guys are probably familiar with the concept of what a virus is, right? I mean, we even use that term when we talk about a computer virus. My daughters are sick right now. They probably have a virus. They have a cold or something going on, right? The best example I can give of a virus would be, imagine that a cell is like a ship that's supposed to transport stuff across the ocean. And there's pirates. And the pirates take over the ship. They hijack the ship. Well, the ship is the cell, and a virus is the pirates. The pirates on their own don't have enough to be considered a full cell. The pirates don't have the ability to run the entire ship, because what they do is they hijack the ship. They put a metaphorical, the gun to the captain's head and say, you run the ship for us. And the 15 of us with machine guns, we're going to take over the joint. That's what a virus does. But a virus doesn't actually have a nucleus. A virus does not know how to run the cell. Okay? The virus takes over a cell, hijacks a pre-existing nucleus, and forces that nucleus to do what it wants to. Can I say that again? So a virus is not really a true living cell. We give it a different name. We call it a prokaryote, because the virus infects. It takes over a pre-existing cell, and it steals, it hijacks the living cell's nucleus. The virus on its own has no nucleus. It has no brain of its own. But the RNA and DNA molecules hidden inside of the virus, they replicate themselves, they multiply, they infect, they hijack the actual nucleus in a regular cell. And that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of debate in the scientific world as to whether a virus is really a cell or not. Some people think a virus is a cell. Some people think it's not. One of the reasons why is that we think it's not a cell is that cells are supposed to be living objects. But in order to be living, there were 5 criteria. You have to be able to reproduce. Okay, viruses can reproduce. But you need to be able to grow. You need to be able to sustain yourself. And a virus on its own can't sustain its own life. If there is a flu virus just sitting here on the table, it will eventually die off. Unless the flu virus infects and gets itself into an actual cell. Does that make sense? So it's kind of borderline as to where it goes, but those are the first 2 words I want you to know. Eukaryotes versus prokaryotes. Okay, let's ask this one because I actually have forgotten. Hey, Google, what is a protist?
According to Wikipedia, a protist is any eukaryotic organism that is not an animal, plant, or fungus. The protists do not form a natural group or clade. They exclude certain eukaryotes with whom they share a common ancestor, but like algae-or invertebrates, the grouping is used for convenience.
I think the best way of describing that, because I'm not a biologist, I don't actually know the answer to that one. I'm okay with telling you that. I teach physics mostly. I think it's the other category. Is that fair to say? So you got animal cells, you got plant cells, you've got funguses, and then protist I think is kind of the, if it's not one of those, we're just, yeah, it's the everything else. And I'm not even sure what I'd give you an example as that. Yeah, so, okay. Is that okay so far? So anyways, that should hopefully be the answer to your first question. There's eukaryotes and prokaryotes. It's all about, do you have a nucleus or not? Okay, because the nucleus is one of the most important organelles in a cell. It's the brain, it's the hub, it's the thing that sends out all the information that you need. And so most cells would require that unless you're trying to hijack a different cell and take over the joint, right? So this is your classic picture of a cell, okay? And I put this slide in here just to get us started. I'm going to ask you guys to make a cell over the next couple of classes where you literally make some sort of presentation like this one right here. And you can do this, by the way, with an actual model like this. I've got some other options as well, including you can go to the foods room and make food that represents a cell. I talked to Dwayne. He said that he would help students make a short play if you'd like to do a dramatic representation of a cell. If you would like to knit or crochet a cell, you could do that. Yesterday, I actually chatted with Steph and discovered we have a 3D printer in this school. If you wanted to 3D print a model of a cell, that would be pretty cool. It's possible, yeah. Cool. So anyways, we are going to make, hopefully, a model of a cell in a little while. I want to point one thing out again, though. This is a picture that we have of a cell, and it is in nice, pretty colors. I can't tell you that the nucleus is purple. We don't know that. Why don't we know that? Because the only way we see it is with an electron microscope. There are 2 organelles, for the most part, that we can see with a light microscope. Do you know what the 2 main organelles that we can see with a light microscope are? The cell membrane wall and then the nucleus. Those are the only 2 that are really big enough to see with a light microscope. For the most part, every other organelle we need to have an electron microscope for. But how do electron microscopes work? They shoot electrons at things. And if the electrons either bounce or don't bounce off of objects, they create a computer code of zeros and ones. 1 if it bounces, 2 if it doesn't, or 0 and 1, right? 1 if it goes through, 0 if it goes through, 1 if it bounces off of things, right? That computer code is in black and white. And so this nice, pretty picture, I can't tell you that mitochondria are blue and that centrioles are yellow. We don't really know that, right? So it's artistic license to make it look nice. Okay. Do you guys get why that Plato's Cave thing is where I started the course? 1, because we're just putting random words to stuff. Why do we call it a vacuole? I don't know. We could have called it a dog. Why do we call it a mitochondria? I don't know. We could have called it a waka waka. Make up random syllables. Anyway, so 1, the vocabulary we use is somewhat random, and 2, we can't even see these things in the traditional seeing sense, right? So anyways, this is your standard cell. We're going to make them. Today, one of my major goals is we want to talk about all the different parts. Okay? Back here, on this slide right here, I have this line written out. I want to talk about that for a second here. Cells can be looked at as a living factory. They are a factory. Cells are very specialized in terms of all the different parts inside of it. Okay. Are you guys familiar at all with the story of Henry Ford making the first assembly line for his Ford vehicles about a century ago? It was, yeah, the Model T. It was very revolutionary because before that, if you wanted to make a car, basically one person probably made everything, right? So I, as the person who puts it together, I'm going to put together the wheels and the drive shaft and the windshield wipers and the seats. I'm going to do everything, right? But the assembly line changed things because they made it so that workers had one job. It was more efficient. It's my job to hammer these rivets, and then we move on. And it's your job to glue this piece together, and then we move on. And it's your job to assemble this part. And everyone does a little piece of the process. And in that same sort of way, all of these different parts of the cell, they all have one job. The nucleus's job is to be the brain. It's not its job to come up with energy. It's not its job to package information. It's very specialized. And so anyways, let's talk through some of the different parts of the cell. And I'm going to give you some everyday life analogies, including to the human body, as well as just to other random scenarios. So here's the first one, the cell membrane, probably one of the most important ones. The membrane is the barrier. It is an analogy would be the bouncer to a club. The one who decides you get to come in, no, you're not allowed to come in tonight. It's the selective judgment person who decides I'm going to allow you and your friends in, right? It's, I don't mean for this to be political and slightest, but this is immigration services. It's allowing the Border Patrol to say, yep, you're allowed to come in, but unfortunately you have a criminal record. You're not allowed to enter into the United States because you have a record from 5 years ago, right? Or, it's the wall, right? It's what separates outside from inside. Okay? It's a protective barrier, but more important than that, it's this word right here. It's all about transportation. It allows things to go in and out. What sort of things do we need to put inside of cells? Oxygen is a good example. We need oxygen inside of cells. Once oxygen has been utilized, what do we need to get back out of the cell again? Carbon dioxide, yeah, right? Glucose, sugars. There's lots of different things. Water, we need to have nutrients in that water. It needs to go in and out of cells, right? And so it is what selects, protects certain things in, certain things out. Okay? When I was talking with Dwayne about the idea of using a performance sketch as a way of talking about a cell, for any of you who would like to do a drama presentation, which I think would be awesome, Dwayne came up with the idea of a bouncer to a club, being the person who, there's that little silk rope that they use. It's not like it would actually stop anybody, right? But the bouncer then opens up the thing and says, now you may go in, and you reclip it back on again, right? You can make a little sketch where there's a bouncer to a club. And then maybe there's a nucleus, and the person who's the nucleus, you could dress up and you could wear really thick glasses and put them up on your nose and have a little pocket protector. You could be the brains of the outfit. You could be like a stereotypical nerd, something along those lines there. You got I don't know if that would work or not, right? But that's the nucleus. It's the director. Or maybe rather than doing that, maybe you could have someone have the microphone and be in charge and be the megaphone and tell you, you do this, you do this. You're the foreman at the work site, right? You could actually do a play or a presentation, however works for you, where the nucleus is the director. They tell everything what to do, right? The nucleus of the human body is the brain. That's the analogy there, right? The brain is the hub. It's the control center. If you've watched the video Inside Out, you guys watched that video, the Disney Pixar one of the little girl Riley who's got all her emotions, right? Joy and fear and sadness. My kids love that one. You guys have seen that one? Most of you? Okay. Too many times, right? The hub, the control center is the nucleus, right? So, okay, moving on. Oh, do you want more? Oh, okay. So the nucleus directs the activities of the cell. It's what tells everyone what to do. Here's another analogy. It's my bossy 7-year-old who likes to tell her sisters what they're going to do. We just try not to call her bossy. We say that she has leadership skills. Because bossy is not a very nice word, I think. So. But my 7-year-old likes to tell my 5-year-old, Cammy, we're going to do this today. And, Cammy wants to hang out with her sister. so she follows directions. Right? So that's the nucleus, the person who's bossy and in charge. Leadership skills. Okay. Never heard that one before, hey? Here's the next one. Cytoplasm. The best analogy I have for cytoplasm is it was Black Friday last Friday, right? 2 Fridays ago? And we wanted to buy some Christmas presents for my daughters. And so we went on Amazon. We bought some Amazon stuff. And it showed up in the mail eventually. And in order to protect the stuff inside of the box, Amazon filled the box with those big like air bubble kind of package protectors. You know what I'm talking about here? Sometimes they put in like packing peanuts and stuff, but that's too expensive now. And it's bags of air. Anybody seen that before with an Amazon package coming in the mail? Right? My daughters love popping that stuff, right? Well, that's the cytoplasm. Only it's not bags of air. It's like a jelly, we believe. And the jelly basically is a protective cushion so that when the cell is rumbling around all over the place, all the little organelles inside don't go crashing back and forth and break. Right? If I buy my daughters a tea set for Christmas and it comes without bubble wrap, as the cell, or in this example the package, shakes around during transport, it's going to break the tea set. Well, same thing with the cytoplasm. If we don't have cytoplasm, a jelly to keep all of these little pieces, the lysosomes, the mitochondria, the nucleus, if we don't keep them all set in place, well, then they're going to break. They're going to crash because cells don't stay in one spot. Cells move all the time, right? I just moved a bunch of cells around. I can't have nucleuses go crashing around inside of the cell. It's a jelly-like component. That's basically, it's there for protection. It's there for stability. It is not overly thick because things are able to move through this jello, but it's there for cushioning. Fair enough? And if you didn't have cytoplasm inside the cell would basically shrivel up and collapse on itself. So it also helps to give it a little bit of bulk to it. The human body analogy, there's not a perfect one, but it might be something like flesh, fatty kind of tissue, where like my arm can't literally just be skin, bones, and veins. Does that make sense? Because like if I just had like a tube of skin around my arm, 2 bones through my arm, and some veins, like that wouldn't be enough. Like we need to have some flesh inside of there for everything to kind of sit inside of. I don't really have a good word for that, but does that make sense? Like the fatty sort of tissue that your body would need. That's what the cytoplasm is. By the way, for any of you, when you think about how you want to build yourself in the next couple of days or so, making Jell-O is actually a great example of one where you put stuff inside the Jell-O. You find a Jell-O mold, you set stuff inside the Jell-O and the Jell-O itself. Oh, wait, next two. These 2 things are unique only to plant cells, and I didn't actually write down what they do on this slide here, so let's discuss this. Chloroplasts, basically, they make the food. And they make food through the process of photosynthesis. You guys have probably heard that word before. Synthesis. What sort of things does the food need to do? What do you need to do to plants over time? Otherwise, they'll wilt up and die. Okay, we need water. Water's number 1. They need sunlight. Not oxygen. Good try, though. It's actually carbon dioxide, yeah. The other one. Because plants actually make oxygen for us. Here's the recipe, basically, for photosynthesis. We take carbon dioxide from the air, which as humans, we breathe out. We breathe out the very carbon that we're trying to tax. Good news is plants can self-grow. It takes that carbon dioxide, it adds water, whether we water the plant or whether it just naturally gets watered due to its environment. You also need to add some sunlight. Take those things, add them together, and it makes sugars for the plant to eat and consume, and it also makes oxygen. Because we do the opposite. As humans, we breathe in oxygen gas, and we breathe out carbon dioxide. So plants and animals actually have this symbiotic relationship where plants do the exact opposite of what we do. That's what chloroplasts do. Chloroplasts are only found in plants, and they feed the cell. They make it its sugar. Because the plant needs some sugar to live on. breakfast. Plants can't do that. They can't make their own food. Water is not their food. Water is what they use to make. The cell wall is another thing. The best analogy I have for a cell wall would be one would be like your skeleton. The cell wall in a plant cell gives it the rigid strength it needs to grow. You guys know those massive redwood trees they have in California that grow to be like forever tall? Like plants sometimes have to be exceptionally strong. Bamboo shoots can grow meters into the head. They need some more strength. You can't have like a wobbly, flexible, pliable cell. You need cells that are strong. This desktop right here, I know it's been coated with a laminate lacquer, but it's made of wood. It is fairly strong, and the reason why is due to the cell wall. It's like a skeleton. It's a framework that holds it up. Another analogy would be you know how you have a tent, and on the outside of the tent is the fly of the tent that's like the mesh, the membrane, but you have to have all of those sticks inside of the tent to kind of give it a framework to it. That's what the cell wall basically is. And humans don't actually have that, but plants do. Plants have cell walls. And the important thing about it is the plant cell wall sticks around even after the cell dies. So even after the plant is no longer living, it doesn't really decompose in the same way that a human body does. Human cells get pretty gross after a while. It starts to stink. Plants will decompose over time, but the cell wall is strong enough that it gives it that hardness to it, I guess. It gives it its rigidity that we make things out of wood, even though the plant is now dead. One more analogy for the plant wall. Remember that example I gave you of shopping for Black Friday? The box itself that my daughter's tea set came in, the box is a good example of the cell wall. It's a framework. If it were to have come in a bag instead, if I were to get my daughter's tea set shipped to us in a bag, even if the bag had like some protective stuff in it, I think it would probably be more likely to chip and crack. But by putting it in a box, just the edges of the box provide strength, and it's nice and easy to stack all of those boxes in the back of a truck, right? That's how plant cells work. Plant cells basically stack cells upon cells upon cells in a nice framework. I think I even have a picture from last day's notes. I'm going to find that real quick here, since I'm off topic and discussing it. Where is that cell here? This was from yesterday. This is an onion cell, onion plant. And you can actually see the cell walls right here. These edges right here are edges of cell walls. Computer's glitching here. You can actually see the nucleus, by the way. The two things with the light microscope, the nucleus and the cell wall. And can you see how they're all like stacked, all nice and neatly and organized? Just like boxes in the back of an Amazon Prime truck. All right, I got to move on. $79.99 a year. Plus you get access to all sorts of good TV shows. Okay, moving on. The next two things we want to discuss are two very similar terms, but they are slightly different. They're called vesicles and vacuoles. Vesicles and vacuoles are basically storage. One of the examples I like to use is your stomach. The human body has a storage compartment. It's not long-term storage, it's short-term storage, but we store food inside your stomach. I mean, it gets processed, obviously. It gets broken down, but that's kind of like a vacuole or a vesicle. The difference between the two is whether or not they move at all. Vacuoles are stationary. Vacuoles are storage compartments that they don't move. It's like a closet. You can't move the closet in your house. If the closet is built into your house, it stays in one spot. It's not so thick that you can't move things through it if you want to. So short-term storage versus long-term storage, basically. Specifically, these things are all about transporting materials. When I go to Costco, and you know how Costco, they don't put your groceries in bags? So they give you like, maybe a box. It's a short-term storage box that I'm going to put my groceries in to get them from Costco to my car. are tubes through which materials can be transferred. It's basically like the veins and the arteries of the cell. They're actually very closely related with the nucleus. Most of the nucleus is usually very close to the endoplasmic reticulum, and it allows like a series of tubes for things to go through. The analogy that I think of in my mind is those like vacuum tubes that they use to like send messages through at either the hospital or at Costco. If you know what I'm talking about, my wife works at the hospital. When she has to literally send a document, not an email, but a document from her floor to another floor, she like puts the document in the little capsule. You put the capsule into the clear tube, you close the door, you press the button, and it goes whoosh, and it sends the capsule to another place in the building. You guys know what I'm talking about? You've never seen that before? How do you describe that thing?
I've seen it in like Willy Wonka's.
That'll work, yeah, that sort of thing there. Costco has these. Have you not seen them at Costco? Those tubes? Some of you are nodding. Okay, your challenge. Next time you go to Costco, look for the clear tubes. They're usually clear, I think. You put a little capsule inside of it. You press the whoosh button, and it sucks it up into the roof and sends it around. Yeah. Yeah. You can hear the vacuum seal. Anyways. If you don't get that analogy, that's fine. But basically, they're passageways, right? They're secret passageways that you can send things through. So you could store your stuff in a vesicle or a vacuole, or you can use the secret passageway tubes, interconnected tubes, that you can transport materials through. Although they're geographically related because they're next to each other, these two things have different tasks. But the endoplasmic reticulum is studded with proteins, meaning that like inside of these pathways that all exist right here, there's all sorts of proteins growing on the outsides of those. Two somewhat different tasks, but in the same area. Okay, those are known as ribosomes, the proteins. Pause for a second. We got too distracted by the Costco suction tubes. Yeah, that'll work too. They have those too. Yeah. Or honestly, just think of arteries and veins, right? Okay. Now, in order to put things into their sealed containers, there's an apparatus in the cell. We call it an apparatus. It's called the Golgi apparatus. And the Golgi apparatus is basically a whole bunch of like half-wrapped circles. And what they do is they engulf stuff that needs to be wrapped up. I think the best way of me showing you this is honestly with the sheet of paper I used last class. If I have an object, I think last time I just used a pen. Say this is carbon dioxide, and you want to get carbon dioxide out of your cell. The Golgi apparatus will then take this, it will then wrap itself around it, and now this is a vesicle. Does that make sense? The Golgi apparatus is the wrapping paper that goes around something to make it into its container. And you can kind of see how this has got this like kind of curved section to it right here? An incoming object, like let's say there's something right here that you need to get rid of, this thing will wrap itself around it, and it will then turn it into a vesicle. So it's like the wrapping paper of the cell. It's what encompasses, it engulfs, and it surrounds in order to make a vacuole, and really they're flat discs is really what they are, like a flat sheet of paper that surrounds something. Okay. The other thing we want to talk about here is something called a lysosome. A lysosome is it's used to destroy. It's the doctor. That's not bad. I used a different analogy in the last class, but I like the doctor. Here's my analogy. This is a bad one. I'm sorry. You're a mafia person, and there's a murder that just happened, and you need to clean up the murder. And you've got like the guy, you know, that comes into the crime scene who disposes of the bodies. Can you kind of picture that in like in a movie kind of thing? Like the guy who comes in with the gloves, wipes the place down, gets rid of the fingerprints, gets rid of the bodies, buries them out in the field or something like that, like gets rid of the blood, Lysols the thing down. I think that's actually part of the root of the word Lysol must be lysosomes, because it's all about breaking down damaged organelles or destroying invaders. It really does one of two things. If it's a white blood cell's literal job is to engulf invaders, swallow them up, and destroy them. And it's lysosomes, these enzymes, that basically destroy things. Okay? They also break down damaged organelles. Okay? Your human body you will go through your entire cell set. I think it's every 7 years. All of your cells in your body get replaced. Well, what happens to those cells? Well, some of them, you like flake them off by like scratching skin cells away, but sometimes your body literally just destroys unused cells. At a certain point, your blood needs to get recycled. Your red blood cells have gotten damaged, destroyed, and they need to basically be eaten up and killed off. Yeah. You probably have. Yeah, you probably have like all of the cells in your body are like 2 generations old by now. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's 7 years. I don't remember. Hey, Google, how long does it take for the human body to replace all its cells? 7 years.
7 years.
Oh, I was right. Hey, Google. Thank you. Anyways, yeah, it's something. Oh, that's so bad. Okay, anyways, so lysosomes are going to be the part of the cell. So distracting. Lysosomes are going to be the part of the cell that basically allows you to destroy parts of it so that you can regrow new cells. Okay. All right, we got to keep moving here. The last one, the one that everybody knows. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Like, honestly, if you just start the phrase, mitochondria are the, everybody knows the answer to that one. Somehow that's just become like a thing people know, yeah.
The phrase is wrong because the average cell is around 2,000 mitochondria in it, and before it was mitochondria, so that's the mitochondrial part.
That's right, so you should do this. Mitochondrion are. Fair enough. It's true. Individually, a single mitochondria helps collectively to power a cell. Work better? Anyways, you guys probably knew this already, right? Mitochondria is where the power comes from. I've mentioned this many times before. I hope that at the end of Science 10, if you leave with learning nothing, hopefully remember this one thing that I say over and over again. Chemistry is the study of matter. Physics is the study of matter plus energy. Biology is the study of matter plus energy, which is alive. But I want to point something out. Biology is not the study of matter which is alive, because that matter does need energy, right? We can't miss that second step there. Cells require mitochondria to power those cells. If you don't have mitochondria, you don't have the energy you need to make all of these things happen. Otherwise, all of these really cool things that are hitting inside the cell, all these different parts of the factory, let me find the picture here. The nucleus, the Golgi, the lysosomes, the cytoplasm. If there is no mitochondria to give it energy, it just all sits there and does nothing. Fair enough? So, anyways, that's my second bullet point for the day. Hopefully you're fairly familiar with all of the different parts of the cell and what they individually do. Okay. For the most part, that's probably reviewed from grade 8, probably. Yeah. Mitochondria? I did not know that. That's kind of cool. Just due to the amount of energy that their cells have adapted and grown over time. Yeah, of course. That makes sense. Yeah. Cool. Okay, I got to keep going here if you don't mind. I've got a slide here that talks about the differences between plant and animal cells. Although plant and animal cells functionally are very similar in terms of how they work, there are a couple of main differences I'd like you to be aware of. So I'll go through them one at a time. The first one is that plant cells have a cell wall and animal cells do not. When plants die, there is still that rigid structure and framework in place that allows the wood to still have framework to it. Humans, we don't have that. Number 2, humans, we don't have chloroplasts. Animals don't have the ability to feed themselves by going outside, intaking carbon dioxide, adding a little water, and just bathing in the sunlight. How awesome would that be if you were just able to go outside, have some water, sit by the pool, bathe in sunlight, breathe in some carbon dioxide, and go, I'm eating. That'd be cool, but unfortunately we have to eat differently. Okay, here's another big difference. Animal cells have small and multiple vacuoles. Plant cells are known for having sometimes just one big vacuole. You can see that in this picture right here. Here's a plant cell. And it has one big, massive storage area. Right? And there's pros and cons to that. Sometimes it's nice to have a whole bunch of little compartments where you store things. We just bought a new vehicle. And sometimes it's kind of cool to go in the vehicle and be like, oh, there's a little cubby hole here, and there's like a cup holder here, and oh, look at this place to store things, right? And sometimes it's nice just to have a big pickup truck where there's a big spot in the back for you to put a fridge. when you need to take it back from the brick when you buy something big, right? That's what a plant cell has. A plant cell is a pickup truck. It has a big bed in it that you can store a whole bunch of stuff. One big storage center. Whereas animal cells, you guys can see they have a couple of small little cubby holes here and there where you can store stuff. Not anything massive, but little things here and there. Okay. Another big difference is that plant cells don't have those lysosomes we talked about. Animal cells break down over time. You have replaced all the cells in your body every 7 years. Plants don't do that. Plants continue to grow, but plants don't replace their cells. When plant cells start to die, it then causes problems. What happens when a branch of a plant starts to die off? Well, that whole branch of the plant will then eventually die, right? They don't replace themselves. They don't self-heal in quite the same way that human cells do. They don't have those lysosomes to clean up afterwards and get rid of the damaged cells. Okay. Finally, we didn't talk about this one, but centrioles are all about cell division. There's a couple different ways that cells reproduce. You guys should have learned about asexual and sexual reproduction in grade 9. And as part of that, you might have talked about the words meiosis and mitosis. And those are ways in which a single cell splits into 2, which then those 2 split into 4, which split into 8, right? I mean, each person here was once one cell, right? Like when the fertilization process occurs, where sperm and egg meet each other, you were one cell. And then that one cell split into 2, which split into 4, which split into 8, right? Centrioles are the things inside the cell that cause cells to divide. They cause the meiosis and mitosis processes. So, anyways, that's kind of the third thing I'd like you guys to be aware of, is what makes a plant or an animal cell different from each other. For the most part, though, plant and animal cells are very similar, right? They have most of the same basic needs. They need a brain. They need a cell membrane. They need storage containers. They need mitochondria. And if you take any one of these things out of a cell, it no longer functions. In the same way that if you take most of the organs out of the human body, you can't really survive all that well without a heart, or a full liver. Maybe partial, right? I mean, yeah, you can have one kidney or one lung, but we need all of these things. You can. It's not as ideal, but yeah, I think you can. And kidneys too. Yeah. Usually you do a lung transplant though, right? Yeah. You need to generate enough air still to be able to supply. Yeah. Okay. The next 2 slides I have on here are actually not things I need to talk so much about, as I just wanted to give you some good quality pictures. But again, these are images of what we render and try to creatively make as pictures of the cell. I have no idea whether or not lysosomes are actually red balls. They're probably not red in color because, I mean, we can't even see the color of them in that way, right? But I gave you 2 pictures in your notes here that show you pictures of what cells look like. Not because I need you to memorize this for some sort of test, but when I ask you guys to do your cell creation project over the next few days, this will give you a good template to work off of. Okay. One of the things I need to point out is that I shared with you a lot of the mini organs, the organelles, but there's more. Okay, we didn't go through the entire list of organelle parts. Just like when you talk about the human body, there's the appendix of the cell, that one thing that doesn't really do anything. What does an appendix do even? It's just there. There are random parts to cells as well. I have no idea, to be honest, really what a perioxome is. I mean, there are intermediate filaments apparently. So anyways, if you see pictures that have more organelles in them than we've covered, don't stress over it. But I would like for you guys to be aware of all the ones that are on our slides. Okay? So if it's on the slides we talked about there, you should know more or less what it does. Okay, last topic. The last thing I want to discuss, the last thing I want to discuss is the cell membrane. The cell membrane is probably the single most important part of the cell because it is what allows things in or out. It's the bouncer, it's immigration services, it's whatever you want to use as the analogy in your mind that says, you, go ahead, come on in. You, sorry, stay out. And it's very important that the cell is selectively permeable is the word we use. Before I get to that, though, I want to talk to you about the structure of the cell. It has what we call a phospholipid bilayer. It's a very technical term, phospholipid bilayer. I want to break this down into 4 specific parts. There's the phospho, the lipid, bi, and layer. I'm I'm going to work backwards. The cell membrane is actually not one layer. It's two layers, and they're actually double layers. The cell membrane looks something like this. There is a layer right here. I'll label this as layer number 1. And there is a layer right here. I'll call this layer number 2. And so that's one of the reasons why this is known as a bilayer, is that there's actually two different parts to it. It's kind of like double paned windows. You guys know how windows, sometimes you can have two sheets of glass? And what they do is they have a sheet of glass, a thin layer of air between them. If then you have a second one. Double paned. That's what our cell is. It's a double paned cell. But each of these layers actually itself has two parts to it. There is the phosphate part, which is written down here, and there is the lipids part. So this part up right here, what we have shown as red balls in this particular picture, these things right here are known as phosphates. And we've actually learned about phosphates before in chemistry. By chance, does anybody remember what phosphate is? What's its chemical formula? It's PO4. Yeah, PO4 is a phosphate. Good job. PO4 usually has a minus charge. These things up here are phosphates. Then these little stringy things down here that, again, this is what our electron microscopes show us as an image. These are lipids. But the way it works then is it backs onto itself. There's a phosphate and a lipid, and then there's another lipid, and then below that you get another phosphate. And so that's why it's called a bilayer, because you actually have a layer here and a layer here, and within the double paned layer you have two different parts. Now here's why there's two different parts. The words we use are hydrophilic and hydrophobic. Hydrophilic is the phosphate, and phosphates like water. So water is allowed to exist on this side or on this side of the barrier. Think of this as one big gate, basically. Right here you can have water, right here you can have water. However, liquids are hydrophobic. You guys know the word phobia? Phobias are fears. Lipids don't like water, and so you would never find water right here. Now some kids ask, Chris, does that mean that this is inside the cell? You're telling me that inside the cell there's no water? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying inside the cell membrane, you would never find water. And maybe a better analogy would be the wall. The walls of the school are usually made of like some oh goodness, the walls of our school are made out of like cuts that run up and down, and there's a drywall on them. You guys kind of picture that? There's a drywall on our side of the wall. On Janae's side of the wall, there's a drywall. Think of the drywall as basically being this layer right here and this layer right here. But then inside of the wall, there's empty space where the wires are running. Well, what I'm telling you is that if we are water molecules, we can have kids on this side of the wall, we can have kids on this side of the wall, but none of you should try to go inside the wall as well. Does that make sense? And so this wall that exists right here, water can exist on either side. And your last class asked you, which side is inside of the cell, which side is outside of the cell? It really doesn't matter. Which side is inside and outside right here? This is a double layer. Maybe a better way of drawing it is that the cell goes in a full circle, and what you've got is this double layer going on right here. So if you were to zoom in, sure, this is inside, this is outside, but what we've zoomed in on is this little section right here. It basically looks like this. There's a phospholipid bilayer going this way, there's a phospholipid bilayer going this way. You can have water inside the cell, you can have water outside the cell, but should you have water inside the actual membrane? No. And that gets to the question, okay, well, if we know there's certain parts of the cell that like water, certain parts of the cell that don't like water, how does water magically get through them? Does it just teleport? What sort of magic does this? Well, that's what my next slide's about here. Oh, maybe not my next slide. The slide after that. Here, by the way, is the electron of what? Electron microscope. And if you want to label this, if anyone's taking notes by hand, this up here would be the phosphate. This down here would be your phosphates. This right here would be your lipids. And this would be a second set of lipids. Because really, these are attached to each other. These are attached to each other. And there kind of is a little bit of a gap right through the middle. Like that double deep window. Okay, let's get to that question. We are almost done. So here comes the question then, how does water get in and out of the cell? How does anything get in and out of the cell? And really the answer to it is these proteins that are found within the cell. Use a lock and key analogy, where only a certain fits inside of a lock. All of these proteins right here, they're like a lock. And water molecules, for example, those four right here. Carbon dioxide doesn't fit, doesn't have the right shape. Methane doesn't fit, other things, whatever, don't fit, they don't have the right shape. Water, you might notice, didn't go through this protein right here. Water's not supposed to go through this protein right here. Water can totally fit through right here because of the protein fluid mosaic. So, number one, fluid is because these proteins aren't locked in one cell. On the surface of the cell, I'll use this example on the surface of the cell, this is these phospholipids. Well, all inside here, scattered inside the cell, are all think of the protein as, you know how I give the example of when you're talking to this is the entrance down at Sweetgrass, Montana. Go through it. Those weights, those are not locked into place. They're actually float throughout the membrane as a fluid model because they're actually able to migrate through side to side through this membrane. We call it a mosaic because the pattern is like mosaic art. Art would have like little bits and pieces that all kind of go together. A mosaic art would be if you, we had one at my last school, so it was easy for me to explain to kids what a mosaic was. If you were to have a mosaic, it would be like we have like a little piece right here, another little piece right here, another little piece right here. But when you put all the inside of your I'll go back to the slide. We go to my last slide. This is where we're going to finish. The word that we described called fruit. Here's a picture of more or less what the cell red. The heck red is. Now you guys can go through, but do you have any fruit? Oh, you have some oranges into the United States. Blue is the oranges. Red is the idea that sometimes interesting. Why don't